That's what happens for most people is credit cards. Because one of the things that, at least in the United States, we tend to do is we have a very difficult time in sticking to an actual plan because we get 3,000 messages a day that said, you need to have this. Why do you think, as successful as it is, Coca-Cola has one of the largest advertising budgets in the world?
Because it works.
I'm sorry?
It works.
It works. Because whenever we are thirsty or feel like we need to have a boost, we want to have a Coke. I want to give the world a Coke. Let me share something with you. They did a study with kids where they took a bunch of small kids, elementary age kids, and they put up on the board the alphabet. And all of the letters were fashioned like the product that that were included in the name of the product. For example, the C was exactly like the C in Campbell's soup. And they went all A, B, C through. Do you know those kids were able to name every single product that the alphabet had just by the look of the letter? That's the kind of power that we're working against. So one of the things is to have a monthly and annual spending plan that is actually based on reality. Now, a long time ago, my dad used to carry a little notebook in his pocket, and he wrote down every single expense that he had, every penny that he spent, because he wanted to make sure that his budget was actually based on reality. Today, we have such things as Quicken and Money and things like that, which can allow us to do the same thing and very easily keep up with the budget so that we make sure that when we end up the year, we have not all of a sudden accumulated debt on a credit card because we really have been spending more money than we make. Now, why is it that having a budget is so important? Because one of the things that we have the opportunity to do as disciples of Christ is to use those assets in a way that reflect who we want to be, who we are called to be. Now, before we go further in that direction, let me suggest to you that one of the important things for you to reflect on, for all of us to reflect on, is what are called money messages. Money messages. As an example, money doesn't grow on trees. What money messages did you have when you were growing up? I'm sorry? A penny saved is a penny earned. What else?
You think I'm Rockefeller?
You think I'm Rockefeller? I haven't heard that one before, but that's stupid. What else? Oh, come on. Almost everybody heard money messages when they were born.
If you want it, get a job.
If you want it, get a job. What else?
Put a little something away for a rainy day.
What's that?
Put a little something away.
Put a little something away for a rainy day. And you?
There's a man in jail wanting out.
There's a man in jail wanting out?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you wanted it, it was a man in jail wanting out.
Okay. What else?
Waste not, what not.
Waste not, what not. Okay, so there are all kinds of money messages. It's important to know that because those money messages are incredibly powerful messages that will have an effect on the way you manage your finances. Let me share a little bit of my own life. I grew up in Brazil. I was born in Brazil, and I was the son I was one of 6 children born to Southern Baptist missionaries. Now, as you can imagine, we never went hungry, never had lack of shelter or so on, but lots of hand-me-downs and lots of financial sacrifice and so on. But one of the things that happened every month, particularly when I became a teenager, is that mom and dad would sit at a dining room table at the end of the month, and they would try to figure out what bills were going to be paid and what bills were not going to be paid. And it was agony for them. You wouldn't believe how much tension I experienced as a young boy and worry. And I mean, there were several times I wanted to go get my little piggy bank and give it to them to see if that would help the situation. So, the message I got very, very clearly was this: there is never enough. There is never enough. So, second message. When Dad would go out with us for a ride around town, every time he saw a Mercedes-Benz, he would go on and on about how wonderful that Mercedes-Benz was. And he said this: if I had not become a missionary and gone into the business world, that's what I would be driving. So, I grew up and intended to go into the academic world and be a psychologist. And got a degree in psychology, went to graduate school in psychology, but went into the business world. And after a couple of different careers with Xerox in the real estate business, I became a stockbroker. And I worked very hard, and I made more money than I knew what to do with. I mean, literally. You know, when you grow up with lack of means, one of the ways that you might come out is that you got to conserve, you got to save, you got to make sure you dampen down your expectations and your hopes if you're going to get by. So I grew up, and all of a sudden I had all this money, and I literally did not know what to do with it. Okay, so there was more than enough based on what it was that I needed and wanted. But guess what the internal feeling was the entire time? There's not enough. And I worked way beyond anything that I actually needed, because there was this internal message that kept saying to me, there is never enough. Now, when I was a stockbroker, any guesses as to what kind of car I drove? Yes, sir.
Honda Element.
You're right. Honda Element. Now, I had a Mercedes-Benz. I had two of them. And to this day, one of the most powerful spiritual experiences that I had that had something to do with my formation as a Christian was the decision to sell the Mercedes-Benz, not because I needed to, but because I no longer felt the need to drive that kind of vehicle in order to say something about myself. So who am I as a financial being? I need to know what I make and what I spend, and I need to know something about my money messages. But for those of you who are in a relationship with someone else, either with a marriage partnership or so on, you have to also consider the fact that your partner has money messages also. And you better know, because if you don't know them, it can create all kinds of conflict. So, the next step, once you know who you are as a financial being or have some sense of it, is some discernment. And the discernment is this: what are my priorities? What are my priorities? First thing I want to suggest to you is that you have two documents available to you already that will tell you an awful lot of who you are in terms of your priorities. What are your priorities? And those documents are this: your checkbook and your calendar. They're pretty accurate, because if you look at your checkbook, you will know how it is that you spend your treasure, where it is that you put your treasure, and therefore where your heart, quote unquote, priorities, where your heart really is. It depends on where it is that you are putting your treasure. And then, of course, by looking at your calendar, you know where one of the most precious things we have, which is time, where that is being allocated. And we'll tell you something about your priorities. Now, the next step is to say, is that what I want my priorities to be? Or, a better question, are those the priorities to which God is calling me? Are those the priorities to which God is calling me? Because if they're not, then we can be intentional about the whole process of reprioritizing, developing a sense of understanding about what really are our priorities. Who do we want to be as a financial being? And one of the exercises that can be most helpful is to ask ourselves, is there a difference between needs and wants? Is there a difference between needs and wants? I think in the United States, we kind of gotten confused about that. Because we have these 3,000 messages that want us to believe that everything is a need. In what a lot of it is just wants. And one of the most disappointing things that we experience is when we achieve that want. You know, that one thing, if I just had that, everything would be better. We get that, and then what happens? Nothing's better. Nothing's really changed. In fact, now we create another need that's down the road, which starts the whole anxiety cycle once again. So one of the questions is, what is the difference to us about our needs and our wants? And then we can come to the place where we have an understanding, a developing understanding. And I want to make sure you heard that word, a developing understanding of what our priorities are. Because this is a dynamic process. We are engaged in something that changes over time. As Episcopalians, we do really well with change, so that should be no problem. But we come to an understanding of what our priorities are, and then we go back then and say, how does this spending plan that we have reflect those priorities? Or does it? And if it doesn't, then we develop a new monthly annual spending plan that is designed to reflect those priorities. For example, if one of the things that we really want to do is become engaged in mission work that carries us to another part of the world, and our budget doesn't allow us to do that, we can look at our budget and say, what is it that I can change? What are some things that are no longer really priorities for me, so that I can turn around and allocate more of my money to mission work? It allows me to go on a mission trip outside of this country. So the spending plan is there as a way for us to answer the question, where is my treasure going? And is it going to where I want my heart to be?